couple of weeks ago, I think I drove down to Brownsville, and I met. That's when we first met.
That's right.
And that was kind of. It wasn't necessarily like my first time hearing about like co-ops, but that was the first time that I actually spent like more than 20 minutes hearing about like co-ops and stuff like that. And I just thought it was a very interesting concept. And the little that I know about co-ops is kind of like from my time in agriculture, because I understood that like, African American farmers specifically use co-ops and stuff like that. So just for the most part, I kind of wanted to talk about what co-ops are, why they're important, and how they can kind of be used for socioeconomic development and stuff like that. So yeah, if you don't mind, just kind of introduce yourself, and then like you tell what you do in the organization that you're working with, and then as much as possible, we'll try to help the audience understand like what co-ops are, why they're important. All right.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Rosemarie Henkel-Rieger. I'm with the Southeast Center for Cooperative Development. I'm the co-founder and co-director, and we're a nonprofit. We've been around since 2018, and so our major focus is to help entrepreneurs who are interested in starting a business collectively, so not solopreneurs, but a group of people who would like to start a for-profit business collectively that they democratically manage and own together. And these are called worker cooperatives. And like you mentioned, cooperatives, they've been around for a long time, and especially in the agricultural world, people are more familiar with them. There are different types of cooperatives. So this is called a producer cooperative. So it's independent farmers get together and they pool their products or their harvests. Like you might be familiar with Ocean Spray cranberry juice. So Ocean Spray is a producer cooperative, and they're independent cranberry farmers or fruit farmers who get together and process their fruit together, make juice. They often own those businesses that, for juice making, and then they market it under a shared brand. So that's a producer cooperative. And what we're interested in as worker cooperatives is a way too where workers can have more control in the workplace. So it's the workers who create value in our economy, and in a worker cooperative, they can actually make decisions around what is done, right, with the surplus they create. Usually that goes to the boss or to the shareholders, right? But in a worker cooperative, it's the employees, the people who work there make the decisions around what they produce, how they produce it, and what is done with the profit or the surplus.
So I'm gonna ask a question that I think might show my ignorance. So co-ops are different than collectives.
That's
is that right?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So cooperatives are in many states. So we're in Tennessee. In Tennessee, there's no like legal entity besides agricultural cooperatives. But in many other states, it's actually also like a legal business entity.
Okay. So and if you feel comfortable, I kind of want to go back a little bit, just kind of how co-ops kind of came to be. Because I like I mentioned earlier, from my small understanding of like what cooperatives are, I know in Flower County with Fannie Lou Hamer, I think she started a co-op. So that's all that I know about. So can you kind of go back a little bit, kind of talking about the history of co-ops and how they kind of came to be?
Yes, and before I do that, I'd like to tell folks that there's a very good book written by Dr. Jessica Gordon Emhart. She researched, for over 10 years, she did research on African American cooperatives and economic thought and put it together in a book called Collective Courage. And so that's like a great resource and pretty much one of the few resources out there when you're thinking about African American co-op history. But cooperation, and I'm sure a lot of people realize this, goes back many, many centuries, and that humans have, worked cooperatively along for many years. And one example is in Mesopotamia. Archaeologists found irrigation canals and have researched that. And what was found was that these were collectively owned and managed by people. So as far back as, I don't know how many thousand, I think it's 5,000 BC, humans have worked cooperatively. So it's not like a new model, but, talking about like the modern cooperative, a lot of people go back to the 1800s, where in England, in Rochdale, England, a group of weavers got together, and they had been displaced and lost their jobs through the beginning of industrialization. And they couldn't make ends meet, they didn't have anything to eat. And so they got together and they started a co-op just to buy, I think it was oatmeal and maybe sugar and some things. And they were, according to historians, I guess the first to like put together the co-op principles. And there's 7 principles, and they were very intentional about creating a new type of business that was principle and values based, and these 7 principles are still carried forth today. So that's kind of the beginning of the modern cooperative. The Knights of Labor, which was one of the early federations, I guess, of unions, or the early start of labor unions. They had started many cooperatives, and that happened often in response to economic downturns when the economy, was bad. Then people got together and formed these businesses together. But it goes far back, and you mentioned African Americans using this model through mutual aid and a lot of things like pooling resources to bury their dead, because that those were high costs. So the model, or this concept, has been around for many years. And
I know you mentioned that like you're working specifically in Tennessee now, and then you mentioned something about like the 7 principles. Mm-hmm. So is there like a standard, would there be like these principles, or just like standard method of operation that applies across all co-ops across the states, or is it just kind of like state by state, region by region? Like how does that?
Yeah, so the 7 principles are actually something that's been adopted worldwide. So it's also a global movement. So you can find different types of cooperatives all over the world. So it's not just, in England and the United States. So these principles have been adopted by the International Cooperative Alliance, and so all cooperatives, when they choose the model, choose to adhere to these 7 principles.
Okay, so there's like a structure even within like the cooperatives. Okay. So then how, I kind of want to go back a little bit to how did you, is it okay if I just refer to it as the SEC or Southeastern
Southeast Center for Cooperative Development.
Do you shorten it?
We call it SEC4CD, but that's not necessarily much shorter, right?
So what gap did you see, or like what is it that you observed and then you're like, okay, we have to start this or like build this in order to fill a gap? Do you mind kind of talking about that?
Yeah. So I have been a worker myself for many years, worked in different industries and education as a teacher, and then became involved in community organizing and worked with labor unions and a group called Jobs with Justice in Dallas, Texas. And there with Jobs with Justice, we worked to engage community, the greater community, and also faith communities around worker rights issues. And so I did that for many years, but it was always kind of fight back. It was, reactionary. The bosses, the companies would do this, and the workers would react. Because usually, it was no wage increases or the working conditions weren't good. And so, workers would strike or protest. And so we tried to get people in the community involved in those struggles. But then, reading and learning more about cooperatives, it showed that, we don't really always have to fight back. We can fight forward. And it's actually necessary if we're thinking about how we can reshape the economy, how can we create something that's more equitable and fair. And so that's what worker cooperatives can do. So we can start building a new economy in the shell of the old. And our economic system is capitalism, and so in order to also to show people that something else is possible. So worker cooperatives, I feel, can do that. They can bring this alternative of workplaces being owned and controlled by the people who work there.
And I think one thing that I really appreciate about the work that y'all are doing, so I'm working on a separate project just around the Fort plant, the Blue Oval plant, because it's just a big part of that is that this is probably when I started on the project I was like, well, this is going to happen, right, there's nothing, it's a train that's coming, it cannot be stopped, but there's also opportunities for the locals for them to not be cut out completely from the economic opportunities, but what can we do ahead of time to set them up to where whenever it does happen, they can actually financially benefit from the opportunities that are coming to the area. And actually, I think this is kind of how all of this kind of came together, because Rosa and I met at Lulu's, which I think it's a great project that I would like to kind of touch up on, because Don and I will interview a little bit later on. But you mentioned that not being reactionary, but working ahead, right? Do you mind just kind of talking about the importance of that, as in if we do want to help, right, just economic development and stuff like that, that it's important to not just react after something's happened, but what can you do to plan ahead, and why that's important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think fighting forward is important, because a lot of times we are told, right, there is no alternative. I think Margaret Thatcher coined that, Tina, right? There is no alternative, it's capitalism, so, be quiet and fall in line. But I think it's important to show people and to that there are alternatives, and to have concrete examples out there. So in the United States, there are about 1,000 worker co-ops is estimated. A study was done and they found 600 people responded, but we know there are more. So there are about 1,000 worker cooperatives with about 10,000 worker owners. So it's a small movement, and it's it's not big and flashy. You'll find a lot of worker cooperatives in kind of hot spots like New York City, Boston, over on the West Coast. And so in Tennessee, we're just starting this, and we have, like you mentioned, Lulu's. It's a worker cooperative here in Memphis, and there are others spread out across the state. So it is a growing movement, and about 30% of all worker co-ops in the U.S. have been started in 2019 or afterwards. So they're fairly new. But just to to let people know that you can do things differently. Like the economy is the way it is because people have created it like that. It benefits very few people, and so shifting that to to benefiting a greater number of folks is what we're trying to do.
Do you mind kind of talking a little about because I'm interested in the concept of a for-profit employee-owned business, right? Because I mean, that's what?
Yes.
Okay. So do you mind just kind of explaining like how that works? Because Rosa and I kind of talked about it a little bit about like, so it has to be more than one person, right?
Yeah. You need to be three.
Okay.
3 or more folks
Okay.
to be a cooperative. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then, without, I guess, like saying more than, what you can say, just kind of like, how does that process work for somebody who's interested in like starting a for-profit business, but they want to do it through a co-op? Like what does that process look like?
Okay. Yeah. So, we offer a 10-week academy. It's free, and we take you through, in the 10 weeks, we take you through the steps you need to consider to start up a business. And so a lot of the steps might not be that different from starting a traditional business, but since the decisions are made by the worker owners, and that is done in a democratic fashion, right? And most of us don't get any training in democracy, right? We get to vote, once, twice a year, maybe, and that's our extent of what democracy we think democracy is, right? But in order to have real democracy in the workplace, we need some training in that. How do we make decisions, right? How do we make sure everyone is heard? What processes can we set up for that? Then is how do you become a worker owner? So those are all things to think about. What kind of structure will your business have? So there are different ways of structuring the business. What we know is, we don't want it top down, right, and the traditional way, but how do we create like a more flat structure? If the worker owners are making the business decisions, then everyone there needs to be transparency, right? And everyone needs to know, how are the financials going, and how do I read these financial statements so that I can make good decisions around the business. So those are some of the things we talk about, like how to set up governance and management structures in the business. We usually have guest lecturers come in and talk about conflict resolution and branding and marketing, so things like that you need to know. We work on a business model canvas that a lot of like business schools and other entrepreneurship educational centers use, a way to think about, what are the components of your business, how do they interact, and how what value are creating and for whom, things like that, how to talk to your customers. So those are some of the steps. And what we also can offer is financing. So, it takes money to get a business off the ground. And we focus on folks who've been marginalized in the traditional economy. So these are the people who, can't fall back on generational wealth to start up a business. And so we're a part of a community wealth cooperative, a national group called Seed Commons, and we're one of the over 30 peers that are local loan funds. And so we're excited that, we can actually offer worker cooperatives some financial support there.
And I just kind of quickly touching on this, and the loans, are they, it's owned by the co-op? Is that correct? So it's kind of like a bucket, you lend it and then it goes back into the bucket for the next person, if
That's correct.
Okay.
So the Seed Commons is a cooperative itself, and I think we're about 36 or more peers, and we all share access to, I believe it's over $50 million right now, which compared to venture capital is of course not a whole lot of money, but for the worker co-op world, it's huge. It's really a game changer that we can offer cooperatives like Lulu's some financing. And so these are loans, like you mentioned. So they're paid back, and as they're paid back, right, they can be lent out again. So we can help more businesses. The unique thing is that the lending through Seed Commons is also based on some unique principles like non-extractiveness. So that means that we don't ask for credit checks or personal guarantees like a lot of banks do, but we mitigate risk by working very closely with the cooperatives. And so we go step by step with them. And so if problems occur, which they often do because, the economy is often like a roller coaster, and we can be there, help think through pivots. We can offer technical assistance, and so we can ensure one of the principles, which is sustainability, right, is ensured for these co-ops, and we're not just lending to them, leaving them on their own, and if they fail, like there's no safety net. So we provide that through technical assistance.
So I see that you obviously believe in the model. Do you find that there's just like a general lack of understanding of like co-ops and how they work, or like their importance? And then, I mean, how can that, if it's a model that you believe in, you think is very beneficial to society, how then can we change that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I forgot who or where I read this, but I think the U.S. has like the highest density of co-op members in the world, but people don't know it, like you said. So, and there are different types of cooperatives. Like credit unions is a type of consumer cooperative, or you might shop at a cooperative grocery store. REI is a consumer co-op. Utility cooperatives, you might get your electricity or your Wi-Fi from a utility cooperative, and they're prevalent in rural areas. mostly. So a lot of people, are a member of one of these cooperatives, but don't really know that, right? And to a great extent, it's also the fault of the co-ops that they don't promote that more and engage their members more. So that it's kind of a paradox, right? Where we're in the U.S. with all these co-op members, but people don't know and aren't a part of these businesses actively, right? Where they're members. So education is a big part of that, and that's why we offer our 10-week academy. We offer intro. Kind of co-op 101 classes. We do that online through Zoom, so it's accessible to people. And so, education is a big part. And bringing the model, like you mentioned, the Blue Oval City area where the Ford Motor Company is, creating this I guess, manufacturing city, right, with $5.6 billion, right, just creating it out of the ground, right, and almost in the middle of nowhere, right, there's not much around. And so in these areas where this great economic potential is being created, that we're trying to come in and offer the co-op model so people in the community surrounding Blue Oval, have a chance to, try something different if that's, what they'd like to do.
I like 2 years ago, I went down to Mason, Tennessee, because they were just having some issues with the city charter and all that with the state of Tennessee. And so, because I've realized that within the last 2 years or so, there's just been so much going on in that area. The two counties, I can't remember like what the two counties are.
Haywood and Tipton, I think.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do understand that there's just like a lot of people kind of coming in, and there's so many voices kind of pulling the locals in different directions. So how do you kind of like separate your voice from all the different, people that are, either just going there to like invest, buy properties, do all that kind of stuff? I know it's a lot of noise. How do you kind of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we've tried to do, so we received some funding from the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. They have some grant funding for economic development and cooperative economic development in rural areas. And so with that support, we're able to offer our classes for free and not just the classes, but we have about 20 people from the area that we're working closely with to start up a variety of businesses. And so after the 10-week class, they will also have access to some deeper dives. So we have about six other projects set up where they can work more closely with someone on branding, someone on conflict resolution, legal support, democratic decision making. And so they can practice that in a more concentrated fashion to give them, a better start with their cooperatives. We also have access to some one-on-one time with experts and to get technical assistance, to really help them build a solid foundation for their co-op business. And we're looking to be there, for the long haul. So since we're a nonprofit and fund ourselves through grants from foundations and from groups like the USDA. So we want to make sure that we can continue that work and then also bring, the financing to those co-ops that are getting off the ground in the area.
Are people generally receptive, or do you have to kind of do some intro first to kind of present and give the idea?
Yeah, yes. We were fortunate to work with groups like Tennessee for All, who had been working in the area, and also LIUNA, the union, has been really helpful. They're letting us use their space, and they've reached out to their members to see if anyone is interested in starting a business. We've talked to some of the regional mayors in the various communities there, and other community leaders. So yeah, we've reached out like to the community. I guess one other thing, that we're not coming in and telling people what to do. So we're leaving it open to folks to explore the co-op model, and then if they feel like that's something they want to do, then we can help support them more. But it's interesting because it's a very entrepreneurial, like the larger community is very entrepreneurial. So it'll be exciting to see, what businesses actually, come together here.
So, having touched up on like just the history of co-ops, like what does the future look like for cooperatives moving forward?
Oh, I think it'll just keep growing. People are tired of the way they have to work. We see how extractive capitalism is, and it's just this ever increasing inequality, that can no longer be hidden. I guess maybe for a long time, it was easier to hide it, but so I think a lot of people, are tired of working hard and not being able to, afford to buy a house. Or I know in Nashville, like teachers, firefighters, they can't even live in the city where they work. And so yeah, I think it's people see like the grave inequality and are looking for something different, something more equitable. So we see like every class we have, there are more and more people interested. So yeah, I think it's an unstoppable force.
It's a good unstoppable force. Yeah. Is there anything else that I guess I forgot to ask you, or like didn't mention, that you would like to share?
No, just I'd like to encourage people listening to, if they do have a different, if they have a business model or a business in mind, to consider, starting a business with others and sharing that, sharing the power, sharing management, sharing control, and help us build, something new in the shell of the old.
It's real good. Thank you. And I think this is like the first conversation just on cooperatives, and the hope is that we'll just have more stuff, not just on the podcast, or just on social media, but also just on the website, to hopefully just kind of like dissect and kind of, because I personally think that it's important, and that's why I'm very appreciative of you taking the time to come here and talk about it. But I think it's just one of those things where like we just got to figure out different venues and different ways to like educate people and help people understand why it's important, why it's been so beneficial in the past, and how it can benefit moving forward. With the economy, it's getting kind of hard to like support a family with a single income. So thank you so much, and looking forward to more conversations in the future.
Yes, thanks for having me, Emmanuel.
All right.